Hello, sunflowers, and welcome to Good Journeys Tarot. This is 78 cards in 78 weeks, where we will be discussing the Two of Swords this week. I know it's a holiday weekend, so many of you will probably be catching this in playback. I hope that you will enjoy what I have to say and that you will contribute in the comments if you're not with me today. Um, Before we start, I thought I'd share some things that have come into my life and some things that have been going on. First of all, there is a new video up on GJT After Dark. That's my more adult themed tarot channel where I share things that I don't want to share on this one. And so that is going to be a walkthrough of the erotic tarot, which I showed you, I believe, last week or the week before had come into my practice. I'll also be sharing some of the things that happened during my vacation with those of you who are interested. So if you hop over to the link tree in the description box below, you'll see that link for GJT After Dark and be able to see that as well as other upcoming videos. While I was there, I got this sticker, which I have put now in my planner. It says, make something good every day. And so my plan for June was to do some kind of sketch or drawing every day so that I could build up my practice and experience, because I do much better with an assignment than I do with with coming up with things off the top of my head, right? Welcome, Amy. So glad to have you here on this holiday weekend. Looks like some other people are joining us as well. So I purchased this book of drawing prompts, and it's just that. It's like words with a little bit of space to do the drawings, and it was actually very much used. It didn't say it was used on Amazon, but it came used. They refunded my money, but I was able to salvage it. I took the used pages out and I wrote those words in, on pages where I had a lot more space. And so I'll be working through this over the next year or so, practicing drawing various things because I need assignments, and now I have assignments. Another thing that came into my life this week, which will be no surprise to those of you who were watching our broadcast last week when Amy and Tarot Stash teamed up on me about the greatness of this deck, the Santa Muerte Tarot. An interesting thing happened this week. If you look on the back of the box here, it says Memento Vivere, which means don't forget to live. The opposite, of course, being Memento Moro, meaning don't forget the dead. There was actually a episode of one of my shows that I've been watching, which was titled "Don't Forget the Dead," using this phrase, "Memento Moro," I think is what it said. Now, after getting the deck, which has the most gorgeous backs ever, and I love how the borders are done on the front. They're not all the way around, but they give you the information. I realized why I had never purchased this deck, and that's because it's not strictly Smith-Waite or Thoth or Mercedes. It's kind of like a mixture of things, and most people, when they talk about it, call it a Waite Smith inspired deck, but I found 14 cards which are completely different than Smith-Waite meaning and imagery that to me speak more to traditional Marseille meanings, which in many ways don't make sense to me when you look at correspondences and that type of thing in more modern tarot. And that's something we're going to be talking about with the Two of Swords today. In fact, all three of the major systems that we know for the tarot interpret the Two of Swords differently. But this is a gorgeous deck. Looking forward to getting to know and working with it, despite it not being congruent with my current understanding of the cards. The other deck, which has come into my life, is the Sex Positive Tarot. This is a Kickstarter deck that I funded. in last fall, I think, and it came out in March. It shipped from Italy. It took a little while to get here. Interestingly enough, both of these decks have connections to Rome. This one being produced in Rome. This one, the artist being born in Rome. So that was an interesting connection. They both are also, to me, a little bit Marseille inspired in their meanings, and so it's interesting. They both came at the same time. Um, I'm not going to show any of the card. Well, I'm going to show a couple of the cards as they relate to what we've been talking about recently. But I will be doing a full walkthrough over on GJT After Dark of this deck, which is just gorgeous. And to give you a couple of ideas, these cards actually have no nudity in them. But do depict sex positive ideas. The first one is death, which we looked at last week. I love this image of death. Like, if you notice, the skeleton only appears in the section within the side. Thought that was really cool. And they associated death with coming out, that kind of ending of one thing, whether it's good or bad, and transforming to something else. So you are no longer hiding something from other people, and regardless of the outcome, right? That kind of transformation that happens from coming out, which I thought was really cool. And then this is the Two of Consent, which is our air card. This is the card that we are studying today, the Two of Swords. Consent being that idea of communicating with people in a sexual relationship. This one specifically, negotiation. And we're going to get to that idea of diplomacy and negotiation or debate when we talk about the Two of Swords today. It comes with a really great guidebook. This was the reason I actually was purchasing the deck to use in my class that I taught 2 weeks ago. It gives you a little bit from the artist underneath the artwork. It tells you a little bit about the idea behind the card, i.e. the keyword at the bottom, negotiation or coming out, as it was on the death card. And it also tells you about the traditional meaning as well as the symbols in these specific card imageries. It offers you some questions to think about related to these ideas of sex positivity. Love this idea. I actually got the Empress t-shirt, which is transgender, is that idea of creating the life that you want, that we sometimes see in the Empress. And so that, again, will be a deck I do a full walkthrough over on GJT After Dark if you're interested in it. So glad to see Hannah has joined us as well. Glad to have both of you with us this weekend as we talk about the Two of Swords. So as we hop into the Two of Swords, I'm going to begin by sharing something that I came across this weekend. As I was studying the Two of Swords, I've also been rewatching Friends. I don't know why. I guess I'm running out of things to rewatch as I sit at home all the time. And in episode 3 of season 3, the one with the jam, there is this discussion going on between Chandler and Ross and Rachel about how relationships work. And so they're giving Chandler a scenario. And the scenario is Janice is coming back from a trip, and she's giving you the option of either meeting her at baggage claim or she can take a cab home. Which option do you take? And he goes, well, of course, it's meet her at baggage claim. And they're like, wrong. It's option 3, the secret option, which is you meet her at the gate. Now, that may not be possible in today's airports, but back then it was. And so the idea being that given 2 options which seem almost equal in choice, there's always a third choice. And that's the idea that I want you to keep in mind as we talk about the various meanings of the Two of Swords and look at the imagery this week. Well, let's start where we always start, looking at some cards. Here is the Star Seeker Tarot. I tried to look in some decks that I've not looked in a while because I either don't work with them regularly, like this one, the cards stick like crazy and drive me nuts. But it's just beautiful. It's basically the same image as our Smith Wade image. Here is the Uncommon Tarot. I have to tell you, I don't know why, but this is my favorite version of the Two of Swords. I think it's the whimsy with which she's flinging the swords. But and we'll talk about why the swords are crossed in other images, but I just really love something about the coloring and this woman in this picture is just one of my favorites. And yeah, Hannah, I will show that in a bit. Um, some cards use the same imagery, i.e., the crossed swords, the blindfolded person before the body of water, but they add like new symbols that kind of make things a little different. Like in the Javel Mar, the swords are up in the cloud, i.e., these are ideas in her head. It's not a physical issue that we're going through, i.e., we don't have the swords right there in front of us, but it's a thought in her head, right, that we're debating. Here in the Wildwood, um, we see a scale in the sky, and they call this injustice, an idea which actually is kind of relevant here because this card often associated with justice because of the blindfolded woman and the two crossed swords. But the moon in Libra, right? So basically something's hidden. It's not true justice, like, say, the Justice card, which is Libra. And so that's an interesting idea. I don't often pull out this deck because it's a different system and it doesn't always relate to the cards that we're looking at specifically. But this one happened to. And we'll come back to that idea of this being associated with justice. This card from the Light Seers Tarot actually does a really great job of depicting the ideas behind the Smith Wade imagery while incorporating something different. Here, the crows. She's fighting these two conflicting things going on, which is an idea that comes across in the card. Crows replacing swords in this particular deck. Lovely. I don't often pull this card deck out because it's all basically keywords turned into street names. And this is the Life is Like a Board Game deck. They call it Indecision Way, i.e., unable to make a decision. This is a very simple way of understanding the card, but there's so much more to it than simply that. These cards made to look like Monopoly board pieces. This card actually, because of putting two people in it fighting over the same piece of meat, makes it look like there's a little bit of a war going on, rather than the idea of peace that we see. And so it's interesting the additional ideas that you get when you change up the image a little bit. Even though the swords cross, they're equal like they are in other decks. Right, exactly, Hannah. That's what I was saying earlier. And I thank you for reminding me to show the image because I do usually show it towards the end and I forget sometimes, particularly if I haven't done anything creative or different about it. Another card that shows two people in it is this one. Interesting idea from the Slow Tarot here is that one is basically the heart. Well, the heart is on this side, the heart versus the mind. So and so that's really an idea that comes across, and I'm going to read about in a little bit from a guidebook for this card. Both Crowley and Benabel Wynn had ideas about what the two swords represent, basically being conflicting ideas. Is it your heart over your brain, or is it something else? But so this actually is a little bit better version of two people in the card than, say, the Goblin Tarot that we just saw, where there was that kind of conflict. Um, and so um, it would be interesting if these were the same person, maybe. Um, and one focused on the heart and one on the mind. But yeah, not my favorite. The next three are Thoth inspired cards. Thoth being the card that is called Peace. This is the Arcana Iris Sacra, a beautiful card depicting a dove at the top. Sometimes you will see a dove if it's Thoth inspired, and that idea of peace as related to no longer battling, right? And we will look at that idea again as we chat about the card. This is a Thoth and Smith-Waite inspired deck, the Lost Hollow. They use the kind of blindfolded woman with her bangs there, but then the Thoth imagery also. Um, Again, calling it peace. This card, not specifically a Thoth deck, but this has a Thoth inspired idea of truce or peace. This is the Heart and Hands Tarot, which I love this deck. I wish it was tarot sized. I would use it more frequently. But it does have some Thoth influence in it. In this case, this is actually really cool. And we'll talk about this idea again in a minute. Some completely different cards from the Thoth or the Smith-Waite imagery that I find very intriguing are the Bonestone and Earthflash, where we see her using the pendulum to make a decision. And so I kind of like that idea. And also that idea of, intuition coming in, as Hannah has just mentioned, and we'll talk about again in the near future here. It being associated with the high priestess, not just through the twos, but because it is the moon in Libra, that idea of the balance of, say, the columns in the high priestess, but also the moon, which appears in the high priestess, is similarly a waxing crescent in the Smith-Waite imagery traditionally. This is an odd one. I've mentioned that before. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. It looks like there's a blind cow, and they're trying to decide whether or not to put it down. I don't know. This was something that I had to consider in my design. I briefly considered making my blades cross this way, but then it looked like I was trying to chop off the person's head, and that didn't work for me. So I ended up not doing it. But this card, this book, this deck, talk Rosemary, does not have a guidebook. Hopefully, there will at least be a little white book with the mass market version that's coming out sometime this year. This is the Curious Travels Tarot, and I will be purchasing the mass market edition, if nothing else, for the little white book, to see if there's any information that will be helpful with some of the images, but also because it is a very rose. It's not rose petal, but it's like rose petal finish that makes it a little hard for me to deal with. But I love the imagery in this card. And finally, a card that I just absolutely love. It's probably one of my favorites, alongside that Uncommon Tarot, is the one that I just purchased from the Santa Muerte, the idea of scissors. I think scissors are the perfect idea for this card, of two equal blades, and scissors representing that idea of cutting. Cutting is a very big choice, whether it's your hair, it's cloth, it's paper, anything, your skin. It's going to leave a mark for the foreseeable future, regardless of how you try to reassemble it. And so this is an idea that I ran with in my card as well, when we get to that, if you've not seen it. So let's talk a little bit about this card and its meaning. And I want to share with you some thoughts. And I will give Benabel Wynn full credit for this. If you haven't seen her tarot meaning videos, do give those a watch. What I'm about to go through is some of what she talked about in hers, on the two cards. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the sword. And the reason I did this is it was just easier than writing everything down. This is one of those cards where the Marseille, the Smith Waite, and the Thoth, all three have very different meanings for the cards. So in the Marseille tradition, you get a very battle oriented approach to the swords, more so than the thought logic idea that we get with the more modern esoteric meanings of the cards. And so it is more usually about the hero, about valor, about fighting adversity, and standing up to misfortune. And then in the reverse, it's about lies and treachery and deceit and those types of things. It's more what I would see like the Six of Wands being in a modern esoteric deck, right? Then we have, give me one moment to scroll over. In the Smith Waite, of course, there is this idea of a choice or a decision to be made. This decision, if you look at the moon, it is a waxing crescent. This decision is going to lead to good things, right? So we want to make sure we're making the right one. And that's why we kind of have this stalemate, this idea that we have the decisions are the same, right? They're equal in value, and it's the outcome that we're uncertain of. And this is called by Benabel, and I think she gives credit to this to weight, but it's called equipoise, in which you have equal distribution of weight. Hence, the way that they're holding the swords like this, and they're evenly pointed. The reason that we use the evenly pointed scissors in the Santa Morte. And so this is about an unbiased decision. They're trying to just clear their mind. That's why they're blindfolded. Let all the external stuff go away, so that we can just focus on these options. And this is why this card is often associated with diplomacy or a truce, because we're taking the time out now to consider what appear to be equal options. And in the reverse, again, this could be about deception. Some people say that the stalemate is the reverse. Some people say a stalemate would be the upright meaning of the card, because you're at a stalemate. That's why you're taking time out to make the decision. Then we have the Thoth. Let me scroll over the Thoth. All right. So the Thoth calls this the Lord of Peace. And in many ways, the Smith Waite imagery denotes that kind of peacefulness as well, taking that time to just be with yourself and your thoughts, which is what we would associate the air with in this card. And that sense of balance, which we get from twos that we see there with the swords crossed. And that idea of the cross over the chest, like closing off your heart, the eyes being covered, closing off your mind to all the outside influence, right? So that it's just you and your these ideas or decisions that you need to make. But in the Thoth, this is where we really get that idea of diplomacy, because they call it peace, right? And they look at it as the moon in Libra is an eye for aesthetics. So like symmetry and beauty. And so when you look at the Thoth image, you see that. Some thoughts from Amy. I can't get past the figure choosing not to look and turning back on intuition, the moon, not wanting to know and leaving well enough alone. I suppose that is an interpretation of the card imagery, for sure. And so let me read real quick And whoops, things are starting to slide off my table. From the Book of Maps for the Spirit Keepers Tarot. This is the Revelation edition. It's very much similar to the Smith Waite imagery, just some elaboration there added into the background. I want to read what she says because this is where she and Crowley differ. Crowley calls these swords silence and chastity. I mean, I get the silence part, the whole being, at peace, right? I'm not sure about the chastity part. There's definitely not innocence when we're talking about swords, right? Um, yes, and I was going to get to that in just a moment. Yeah, so the context of the reading is extremely important as we talk about this card. So she calls her card the blind seer, and she says the blind seer helps us. Well, let me see. Yeah, helps us navigate the stalemate between the ego and the self. So, like in the slow tarot, we saw that heart on one of the two people that were fighting. So it's really an inner battle. The twin swords or twin paths form the cross that we bear. You have yet to gain the realization you need to make an intelligent, reasoned decision. So you're taking the time to look inward. You arrive at inner peace and restore a sense of calm before you go further, right? And so this, in her deck, she attempts to reconcile those three conflicting ideas from the various sources that we've been talking about. So she says where she describes the twin swords in the blind seer as the ego and the self, Crowley describes them as silence and chastity, making reference to Harpocrates, a Greek god of silence. Whereas she kind of goes towards the Egyptian god Horus in her depiction. There's some association there with that eagle and the hieroglyphics in the background. The esoteric attribution of the Two of Swords is peace, with the implication that it is born from tension and halted conflict. So there is something that was not going right, and now we have to make a decision so we can move with brighter clarity. Hence that waxing moon. We're going to receive more light, more illumination on this issue that we've been facing. The context of peace is mutually assured destruction. So this is why we think of this as like diplomacy, right? We're at a point where we realize that things are going to fall apart if we don't make a decision, right? Just as when two people are in battle, there's a certain point where they realize neither one's going to win. So what is the option here? Where do we go? And that's why we have a truce where we can consider those options. So you make peace with opposition because that's the only way to ensure your own security. So for her, basically, this summarizes to when you're faced with impossible choices between two things, the best option is often a third. Like that idea from the scene in Friends that I mentioned before. And, when you have two equal options, sometimes you want to look at the third. And so when I posted this on TikTok, I said, sometimes it's not option A or B, it's number three. I think that's why we have this time out to think, because it is a decision. Do we take one of these ways, each which are equal and are going to have the same result, or do we take a third way that's going to change things, so to speak? All right, so let's take a look at some imagery from the card, and we'll do that using this color version, which, since I have it in here, it's harder to see with my little light. There we go. So when I colored it, I haven't been coloring the sky just because to save ink, right? But I did do the water and the land, and I used my shiny pens for the sword. Sometimes I feel like the sword should be the the focal point, and so then I'll do them in these kind of metallic colors. And sometimes I feel like the swords are just background, and so I'll do them like gray and yellow. But so this was the way that I colored the card. I think it's pretty. And then there's that moon in the sky. So let's talk about this. So I've talked a lot about the waxing crescent there. Um, we've talked a little bit about the swords and how they're crossed over her heart. And we really haven't talked a lot about the water behind her. And so, as Amy referenced earlier, water, especially with the moon above it, is often associated with not just our emotions, but our intuition. When Amy looks at it, she sees this as she's turned her back on her intuition. Um, but there is a sense in which she has cut herself off from all external um, influence in order to find her intuition, to seek her intuition. You know, she's blocked out the sound of the wave. She's blocked out the sight of everything that's going on. So there's a sense in which she's trying to achieve her best intuition by blocking off all of her senses, right? Um, See, this is just me being a little bit obsessive compulsive. I have to put it back exactly the way it was before I move on. And that's something that catches me sometimes, especially in my artwork, being obsessive compulsive that way. So this card can be not only about two good choices, but it could be about two equally bad choices. And that's where some people tend to focus when they see this card is there's just not really a good way out. So both options are horrible. Which one are you going to take? Because they're both going to end up causing you grief or bereavement in the three, right? And you add that next sword. A lot of people see the swords as just about struggle, and I think that context is important, as Amy mentioned earlier. You know, sometimes yes, the swords can be about struggle, and it can be about our battles that we face, but it also can be about communication and our intellect and our thoughts and those kinds of things. And so it really comes down to what other cards are around. Yeah, I know a lot of people do find being by the sea relaxing, and being relaxed is definitely helpful in following your intuition. So this card can, when we see it, depending on its context, be about making a difficult choice, the choice between two equally bad things. It can also be about making a decision between two equally good things that appear good. And as I talk about in my article, The Myth of Duality, which comes out in a couple of weeks in the Cartomancer magazine, uh, it's not always about choice A or B, masculine, feminine, yes, no, active, passive, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it is choice number three, which is a little bit of both or neither of them. And so I think this card kind of really sums up that idea that I was trying to express in that article when you get at its core. It's about taking a mental retreat in order to make that choice and come to that decision. So it could exemplify a truce if we're talking about a battle or a conflict as represented by the other cards around, or the question being asked. Because the moon is associated with this card, it can be about confusion at times. And in reversed, it really varies from reader to reader, from book to book that I've read, how they feel about this. The word stalemate comes up as both a positive and a reverse aspect of this card. And I tend to think of it as being part of that that upright reading, right? You have to have the stalemate. You have to come to that point where you can't move on, or to take the time and make that decision, right? To weigh out the ideas and come to the one that is the best choice. And so for me, as some people have mentioned in my readings, the shadow side of this, or the reverse of this, would be we've come to the decision. We've reached a settlement. We have found that diplomatic solution. We are ready to move forward from here, regardless of what comes next. Um, This card on the Tree of Life is associated with Chokmah, like the other twos. If you remember when we talked a few weeks ago about the Two of Wands, we talked about how it was about um, actively waiting. And here again, we see this idea of waiting, that waiting which breeds wisdom. In the case of the Wands, it was about growth, the knowledge or wisdom associated with growing, i.e., waiting for our ship to come in, right? To see the things happening. In this case, it's about formation, about the thing that's going to be created, right, out of our decision, that what's going to happen next. And so both of those twos, that are associated with fire and air, end up being about waiting. It'll be interesting to see how the other twos show up. I can go ahead and tell you, I'm pretty sure that they're going to be about taking action, not about waiting, which is interesting because typically we would associate action with the air and fire suits, which we've just been talking about, rather than the water and earth suits, which we have not yet talked about. But I have created those cards, and I can tell you both of those are more about action. It's interesting that the twos, which are about balance, would balance out those typically active or passive aspects, so that those cards are actually about the opposite of what we might think they are. Have I lost you? I almost lost myself there for a second. So, is everybody ready to see my two? I will tell you that I pulled on several ideas that some of which have been mentioned already, and some that have not. And so this is the card that I started with, and I pulled imagery from both the High Priestess, which is associated with the twos because it is also a two. And because this card is the moon in Libra, I decided to pull the moon and the sky from the High Priestess card that I created. And then I decided to pull on justice because obviously it is the moon in Libra, Libra representing justice. And so I used the same figure from the justice card. The other thing that I did was I used some of the artwork and imagery from the Two of Wands to connect it to the twos. At first, I thought I might just put scissors on there, but then I was like, that's going to be too much like the Santa Morte, which I've just shown you. And so I went this direction with the person sitting by an open window. Presumably, there's water below. I did not depict that with the moon in the sky, and they're holding the scissors. They are about to cut something. What are they going to cut? How will they cut it? Those are the things that are going through their mind. Are they cutting their hair? Or they're about, what is it that they're going to cut? I decided that I didn't like the moon above the couch, and so I did move it up. And then I started debating in my brain, like, the position of the sofa, right? I didn't want it to distract, but I wanted it to be obvious what it was. And I did play with that imagery some. I moved it back and forth and tried it on both sides. And I did finally decide that I liked this best. But I decided that she needed to be center. I think it's important to have that like um, equilibrium in this card in particular. And so right now, this is what the card looks like. And as I said, I did play with moving the scissors, making them bigger, that type of thing. And when I did it, it made it look like I was cutting off her head or another part of her body. And so I decided to have her just holding the scissors. There's still that cross there that because they are scissors versus the two swords. Um, what are your thoughts on this? What would you like to see or not see in a two of swords that you are or are not seeing? Oh, Laura made it. I didn't see you pop in. Thanks for being here. Um, let's see. Hannah commented on our earlier discussion about the suits. Um, the fast elements, air and fire, call us to slow down. The slow elements action call us to action. So yeah, I don't like that. Yeah, everybody says bigger scissors. So the problem with bigger scissors is it begins to look unrealistic. So like, I mean, I can't decide how to do that. Like, do I just make it look like she's holding ribbon cutting scissors on her lap? Or let's do this real quick. Let me see if I still have the image up. I don't, but I can pull it up real quick. Open and let's just play with it together for a minute because this has been a shorter video. All right. Let's make sure that you're seeing this. No, let me just remove that and um, share this. There we go. Oh, here we go. So here is the image. So if we take this, and I played with actually turning it around in different ways. So like if we made it bigger and perhaps, and then I'll have to play with it some more because it's made up of several moving parts and they each size differently. So I'll have to play with it a little bit. If I did it this way, it kind of looks like she's holding comedy series or ribbon cutting series scissors. Or perhaps I could just do them this way as like she's holding them across her lap. I will tell you that I didn't do this. I actually started trying to put it like it was on her shirt or something, but then it looked like I was cutting off her head, and I didn't really care for that. And her hands are right there, so that's about where I would want them to be. So what are your thoughts? Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the bigger scissors and how they're placed? Everybody wanted bigger scissors. See, so now Amy's talking about the smaller one over the heart. That was an option that I looked at earlier. Let me just do this. Okay, so this is the original version of it. Maybe if it was on her chest, like she's wearing a shirt or something with it on it, or should it turn more? Mm. So how is that, Amy? Is that better? I really appreciate your guys' input. While you're looking at that and giving me feedback, I'm going to go ahead and shuffle the cards for next week. Today we are drawing our phooey. I almost mixed up the cards for the ones that we have done and the ones we haven't done. That would have been bad. So the card that we draw today will be our 39th card. Though I do have 5 other cards completed that we haven't talked about. All right. So when people make up their mind, let me know. Give me your feedback, and we will look at resizing this. I mean, honestly, it's not going to be final until Control Z. It's not going to be final until I finish the entire deck and I look at all of them together. So it could change a number of times um, before then. Even I have a couple of cards that may change completely because I did them because we were working on it and I wanted to get them done, but I really didn't have anything clearly in my mind at the time. So, but I liked how this one turned out as far as including different aspects of the other 2 card, of including aspects of the High Priestess and the Justice card that I created, and also I was able to make my scissors. Which has anyone noticed how I made the handles? Anyone? 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 Yeah. And it's because they're small, but they are butterfly wings. Oh, still bigger than that, huh? Okay, let's do it. Let's make it a little bigger. Control Shift. That. So maybe now you can see it better. All right, the card that we are going to be working on this week. Oh, interesting. It's going to be the Hermit. So we're gonna move from I think I'm good with this too. It's a good size, without being comically big. I do kind of like the position as well, so that may be the final version for now. Oops, I forgot to remove that one. So yeah, so we're gonna be talking about the Hermit this week, and which is interesting. Usually, when I draw a card, it relates to things going on in my life and what is happening at the moment. At the moment, I this does not look like a card that's going to be relevant to me. And usually those are the cards I struggle with creating, or the ones that aren't relevant in the moment. To what's been going on. And the only reason I say that this doesn't seem relevant at the moment is because this is going to be a very active week. I'm actually seeing people this week and doing things and all of that. And so, um, but maybe I will take time to reflect too. We'll see. Definitely looking forward to working on this card. Um, there is, whoops, here something that I've been thinking about, where the light in this one is the star from the star card. Basically, it's an 8-pointed star, that I had been thinking about when I created the star. And so we may draw on that aspect there. All right, guys. I so appreciate your input today on this card, the other card, and hope that one of you will join me in studying and talking about this card next week. So please do let me know in the comments below or ping me through any of the methods listed in the link in the description box so that we can get together and we can discuss it. Um, because it will be fun if we do it together. All right, everyone, have a safe holiday weekend if you are going out here in the US for Memorial Day and doing things. And I will see you soon. Good journeys.